Hello, I'm Casey Aiken. This is 21 this week. Coming up next, new poll reveals what county residents think about the quality of life in Montgomery County. Maryland House of Delegates reject cuts in the education blueprint while proposing new taxes on businesses. And smile, you're on candid camera. The loss of liberty in the name of safety, is it worth it? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member and founder of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Stacey Sauter, a member of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Up until 2020, when the Maryland General Assembly took control over the state's budget from Governor Larry Hogan, the governor set the budget and the General Assembly could reduce the amount of spending or move money around, but it was all within the governor's spending plan. But since the shift in 2021 occurred, when lawmakers passed a new law that gave the legislature more power to alter the state budget, and ever since, there's been a budget crisis as the legislature keeps spending and spending. Going into this session of the legislature, Governor Moore knew that there was a projected budget deficit of $3 billion. And in response, the governor proposed radical changes to the state income tax by creating new, more progressive rates and eliminating the ability to take certain deductions on capital gains. Yesterday, it was learned that the revised economic forecast prediction that the deficit will grow by an additional $300 million. And now everybody's scrambling for money. Mike, there are now renewed proposals to tax sugar soft drinks and business services. How bad is this crisis facing the state? Wes Moore yesterday said it was a major problem.
Oh, I think it is a major problem. I think it's a very challenging time. I think one of the significant challenges, obviously, was the investment that was made in the blueprint for education. Unfortunately, they didn't identify a pathway to fund that, and that's creating real difficulty because now you've got competing policies. And obviously, one of the significant effort we have in any legislative body is how do you make reductions? And so the reality is we've got to figure that out. They've got to figure that out because we know we're going to see more coming from the federal government that's going to have an impact on the state. And so to just kind of put out proposals that are going to increase revenue sources without an understanding of what you're going to reduce on the other side, knowing we're going to see additional cuts or additional impact on the economy coming from the federal government, I think is a pretty short-sighted approach. So I think you're going to have to look at some revenue, but I think you're going to have to take very, very measured cuts or delay certain policies which are going to be challenging for people to get to, but I think you don't have another approach but to take that way.
Well, it seems to me that the House of Delegates has a different approach to things than maybe the Senate does. The House of Delegates seems to be continuing to spend and expand programs where the Senate at least is considering cuts. Stacey, unlike the federal government, Maryland is required to balance its budget. But as I said, after the General Assembly rejected minor cuts in the education general plan, does it seem like anyone really cares in Annapolis?
Casey, the real question is care about what? Keep in mind that prior to 2020, Maryland was one of the most restrictive budgetary states in the country. But in the off-year elections of 2020, voters here passed question 1 on the ballot, which was a constitutional amendment giving the state legislature the power to increase, decrease, or add items to the state budget, assuming those expenditures didn't exceed the governor's cap, right? So what this allowed is reallocation of funds to different priorities. And given that we have a Democrat supermajority in the legislature, and now with diluted executive power, we have a lot more horse trading going on for pet projects. And the net effect makes the budget process less efficient, I think, and more politically driven. So the real danger with that supermajority is that the Democrats are fighting among themselves to enact their pet projects rather than court services while not keeping an eye on the bottom line. So does anyone in Annapolis care, to your question? Well, mostly about their pet projects, which has true consequences for long-term strategic planning. And here we are, $3 billion and counting in a pet project pothole.
Well, yesterday, the governor appeared with the comptroller of Maryland and, to reveal the new projection of a $300 million further deficit. And I think he was doing that just to reemphasize to the General Assembly that there needs to be some moderation taking place. But frankly, even the projections that the governor has in his budget don't seem to add up to the $3 billion number that the deficit is calling for. So, Mike, what happens if they can't balance the budget?
Well, they have to balance the budget, so they'll get there. The challenge becomes, how do they balance that budget? And the reality is, you've got to me, this has to be a year where you are making significant reductions while possibly also looking at some revenue increases. But this can't be a smoke and mirrors activity. This doesn't get better. And I think, as he often wants to do, Adam Pagnuccio did a really good piece early this morning where he talked about why Maryland is so uniquely positioned and the challenge I think our legislature and governor face. One, we are one of the top six states in the country for household income. We are top 3 in education, and we have among the least amount of income inequality of any of the states in the country. And so those are highly unique things to pull together in a single package. And so what they've got to be able to do is to navigate through this to retain those key elements that make Maryland a great place. I appreciate Stacey's comments on the pet projects. The reality is, pet projects by themselves aren't going to get to those kinds of numbers. It really is looking at education, looking at big things, and trying to figure out how you're going to do those in a more moderated fashion.
Well, but if you look at the governor's proposals, I mean, much of the governor's proposals are very radical. The whole change to the income tax structure, adding new layers to the income tax, but also eliminating deductions. So you only have one standardized deductions. And as you mentioned, Adam Pagnuccio, as he's pointed out repeatedly, these changes will fall on Montgomery County residents disproportionately to everyone else in the state. So will our delegation go along with these proposals, or will they push back?
Well, they'll probably push back, but the reality is that if you're going to push back, then what's your alternative? And I think that becomes the very difficult piece, because either you've got to come back with other ways to reduce the budget, or you've got to come back with other revenue sources. And so far, all I'm seeing are coming back with other revenue sources at a time when increasing burden on businesses, when we see a significant impact on federal impacts in the state, is exactly the time you don't want to be increasing that burden on businesses, because we've got to increase the private sector growth.
Stacey, last year, Delegate Moon introduced the idea that there would be a tax on business services. He reintroduced it just this past week. It was a non-starter last year, as business groups, really came out in mass to oppose it. Now, there have been tweaks, some carve-outs, but still, a business-to-business tax is just a further disincentive for businesses to locate in Montgomery County.
I couldn't agree with you more on that, Casey. And as an independent contractor in real estate, I am subject to many of those taxes. So, for example, if I hire a photographer, he can't just charge me a flat fee anymore. He has to put a tax surcharge on those services, which means that that's going to be going up. And so all of that, gets stacked up and makes it more and more painful in the overall picture for the residents of Montgomery County and the state of Maryland.
Yeah, I don't envy the General Assembly in the last 40 days of the legislature, but they've got to come up with some better solutions than they have so far. When we come back from this short break, a new poll reveals that county residents think the quality of life in Montgomery County has declined. And Smile, you're on candid camera. Will cameras take pictures of you every time you're in your car? Stay tuned for more of 21 this week when we come back from this short break.
When I first saw Turtle, my heart was full. Now anything but lonely.
We had this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
We discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things.
but they're all pure
Pure
love.
Love.
And welcome back. Now, let's face it, we in Montgomery County know that we live in the most important jurisdiction in the state. Historically, we had the best economy, the best public schools, the most important businesses were located here, and of course, the most attractive suburbs. Baltimore City may dominate state politics, but it's gritty and it's so much poverty and it's so poorly run. I mean, we in Montgomery County take pride in the administration of our county government. Well, we knew we were better and we were smug about our own self-importance. And now maybe that self-image is beginning to crack. A new poll by the National Research Center about the quality of life here in the county reports a significant decrease in the way the county residents feel about our county. Mike, a majority thinks that the availability of affordable housing is getting worse. The availability of affordable housing is a huge problem, with just 18% of respondents rating it positively. And that's down from 27% in earlier surveys. And what it all comes down to, it means that your children are not going to be able to live in the neighborhood that they grew up in.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a real challenge. And I think, interestingly, it's not uniquely a Montgomery County challenge. We're seeing housing prices increase across the entire country. And while the housing piece, I think, is significant, when I looked at that survey, which is something that's done every 2 years, and so it's actually a really nice longitudinal piece to be able to see kind of how people's attitudes and opinions in the county have changed since the late 20-aughts. And so I think the housing is a piece, but I think that's something that we're all wrestling with across the country. But when I look at things like sense of community is declining, a place to retire is declining, availability of affordable quality childcare and preschool, value of services for taxes paid, looking at all of those elements really kind of begin to show that there's a bigger fracturing, of which the housing piece is a significant piece, but not the most. I don't think most of the most significant. I think we're starting to see those opinions change on those other areas. It really shows that we've got some real challenges to confront.
So, Stacey, the last Republican elected to the county council, Howie Dennis, used to say that Montgomery County residents hate our taxes, but we love our services. And according to this survey, less than half of the respondents, only 46%, positively rate the value of services for the taxes they pay. That's below earlier percentages of 57%. With tax increases coming at the state and probably the county levels, isn't this a big problem for the county council and the county executive?
Yes, absolutely, it is. And the question to me is whether or not they're going to keep that top of mind, where they typically rationalize their actions as just and right, no matter the cost or consequences. And sometimes I feel like our county council makes the state legislature look like preschool where budgeting and spending is concerned. The taxpayers here aren't stupid. And if you've lived here, like I have most of your life, you know the differences in before and after the governance, the current governance, that I feel like has been hijacked by special interests. And I believe very strongly that the one true marketable thing that Montgomery County had going for it, always had going for it, was stability. We sold stability here. And because of that, we had a great economy and we had an enviable school system and our streets were much safer. We don't have that as much anymore. Our consecutive councils over the past 2-3 decades perhaps have squandered a large part of that. And now it seems in some ways we're just a mere caricature of what we once were. So I think that we have to really, really take a close look, as I mentioned earlier, pet projects, special interest, and boutique interest, and try to cut some of the spending and fat there and get us back on a path of stability.
Well, Mike, Stacey touched on this, and you touched on it in your opening remarks. The crown jewel of Montgomery County has always been education. And for at least a decade, maybe more, the quality of public school education has been declining. Report after report quantify that a majority of students graduating from MCPS schools are below grade level in math and reading. And while there are some exceptions to some exceptional schools, the overall, the value of a Montgomery County education is declining, and parents know this, and it was reflected in the responses. So how do we reverse that? And is it just a matter of stabilization, or is it focusing on other things?
Well, I think it's focusing on a variety of things. I mean, Stephen Fuller, who at George Mason, has done kind of economic analysis for the entire region for the last 20 years, and now the institute is named after him there. Pointed out back in the late 2010s, 2012s, that we are overly reliant on federal resources here in the region, in Montgomery County in particular. And we didn't really double down. It was easy to accept that. And the reality is that we needed to continue to grow our private sector in ways that we did not focus on. So that's going to be a really important piece that we're going to have to figure out how to address realistically. Education, I think our new superintendent has a plan of how to try to begin to address some of the issues. The challenge that we have is, and this is where I struggle with kind of the leadership from the county executive and to some degree the county council, is we're letting the superintendent basically put a massive increase on the table. And no one has actually engaged with that to understand kind of how that's going to fit within anything else. What can we do? What can't we do? And effectively, everyone's now massing at the borders. A $330 million increase for our school budget is huge, is astronomical. And to let that kind of get put out without some conversation with the school system to be able to say, where does that fit relative to the other things that we need to focus on while doubling down on how we can make our education system stronger, I just puts us in a position where I'm not even sure how they dig themselves out of it, because now you've already got the battle lines are drawn. And so we've got to be able to now kind of walk some of that back, and that's going to be hard.
It's going to be real hard with such a strong lobby with the teachers union supporting the increases that the superintendent has been recommending. Stacey, you touched on this earlier when you talked about it, but crime is clearly on the minds of residents, as reflected in this poll, which says 14% say crime is getting better, but 43% say crime is getting worse. And the overall feeling of safety is now at 68%. And that's well below the high number that it used to be of 84%. That's a 20% drop. That's precipitous in how people feel about their own personal safety in the county.
Casey, crime is clearly on the minds of residents here, but if I can step back for just a moment and dovetail on what Mike was just talking about in the school budget, I participated in a Montgomery County Taxpayers League. We did a Zoom session last week, and the school superintendent Thomas Taylor participated with us. And one of the interesting things that came up, they're asking for so much more money, but we have a decreasing population of students. It's decreased every year, but yet we have an increase in the number of special needs students in the school, which requires paraeducators. And that's a huge part of the budget. So there was no close analysis on why that is the case. Anyway, getting back to the crime, I mentioned about the decreasing stability here in Montgomery County, and crime is one of the highest concerns, as you saw in that survey, of our citizens. And I believe it's because we saw the defunding and defanging of our police. And we have staffing shortages in law enforcement, with approximately, I think, around 128 vacancies being reported in just the Patrol Services Bureau alone. This impacts the department's ability to respond swiftly to any criminal activity. And we also have a more lenient judicial system compared to Virginia, with stricter laws and harsher penalties. And keep in mind, we border Washington, D.C. and PG County, both of which have higher crime rates. So it wouldn't surprise me that we have criminals migrating into Montgomery County. Fortunately, homicides are down, but residents, they don't need to hear or see anything on the news, because they're seeing it in their neighborhoods, the crime that's going on. And some of the statistics that came out recently from 2023 showed that auto thefts were up 131%. Non-commercial robberies are up 27%, and shoplifting rose something like 38%. These are real quality of life issues, Casey. And so it's understandable why this important survey revealed that residents are feeling less safe here.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I think some shocking things were revealed in this survey. And as Mike said, it's a good timeline to every 2 years to take a look at how the county residents feel about the place where we call home. All right, we have to go on to our last topic, which is all about the use of traffic cameras to monitor cell phone usage. And Maryland mandated hands-free cell phones usage for drivers back in October of 2013. The law, officially called the Transportation Article, prohibited drivers from using hand cell phones while operating a vehicle. Instead, drivers are required to use hands-free devices such as Bluetooth headsets or the vehicle's built-in speaker system, yada, yada, yada. Now, State Senator Jeff Waldstrecker and Delegate Linda Foley of Montgomery County want to employ video technology to specifically detect a human hand using a cell phone. Mike, what do you think of this? You're sitting at a light, you're going to get a ticket.
I don't think a lot of this. I will say I get as frustrated as anyone following people who are going 10 miles below the speed limit because they're sitting there looking at their phone. And I understand that if they're doing that, they're obviously not paying attention to what's on the road, which is putting everyone at greater risk. And I think that that is truly problematic. But I don't necessarily believe that putting additional cameras out there is going to be the way to address this. And I was actually kind of intrigued. I know that Montgomery County Police responded in support of the bill, but the reason that they responded in support of the legislation, interestingly, is one of the points that Stacey raised, which is they don't have enough police to actually do the types of patrols that they previously did. And so I think we've got to try and find a balance. We did speed cameras many years ago, and the premise of the speed cameras was safety in school zones. And we've seen kind of that camels under the nose under that tent continue to grow and expand. And I think we need to be really careful about that.
Well, the civil liberty aspect of this is amazing. Stacey, it's worth noting that using a handheld cell phone for directions is one of the specific exemptions from the Maryland law. So how's the camera going to know whether you're getting directions or you're talking to your mom?
Oh, Casey, I love this and bring it on, especially because Linda Foley is one of the co-sponsors of this. And I ran against her in the last election. If she keeps this nonsense up, I might just do it again and dine on this issue all the way up to Annapolis. I find it this bill to be amusing and frightening at once. And you just mentioned civil liberties. And I thought to myself after I read about this, well, what's to say that I'm not holding a brush to my head when you took that picture? How can you define that that's a camera, a phone in my hand? And that I feel like this is a private space that you're invading. You know, when you get a picture of me speeding on the road, you get an exterior picture of my car, but now you're inviting yourself onto the inside of my car. And so for personal liberties purposes, I'm like, to me, that just seems like a real clear violation.
Well, I worry about it when I'm eating my meatball sub.
Meatballs are not illegal, Casey.
Dashboard dining to work. Anyway, thank you all. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from the short break.
Hey world, I have a quick message. It's about safe driving. All right, let's go. Anytime you're driving, have the seatbelt buckled tight, both hands on the wheel and your phone out of sight. When not in your hand trying to text somebody back, because if you do, your car might get smacked. The moral of the story, just put your phone down. The people on the road will stay safe and sound. Put your phone down, put your phone down. People on the road will stay safe and sound. Yeah.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right. Because a few hours ago in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign. Not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mike Knapp.
Thanks, Casey. I think it's important. We talked about the quality of life survey in the county, and I think one of the interesting things is there were a number of elements that were declining. I just think it's important also for us to acknowledge that we live in a really good place. And if you looked at the numbers on that survey in total and just looked at them kind of de novo, you would look at that and go, wow, those numbers are pretty impressive. And there are a lot of jurisdictions in the country that would be happy to have that. I think we need to be very mindful of the fact of the changes that we've seen and try to positively affect that and make those scores that have gone down go back up. But I just want to leave with the notion that we live in a good place and we all work hard to try and make it a good place, but we need to work a little harder.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for being with us today. I know you have to run.
Thank you.
Casey Sauter, your parting shot.
First of all, Casey, thank you for having me on. And Mike, it's always a pleasure to be on with you. And I realize that there's a lot of fear out there right now. People are concerned about what the federal government is doing, but the budget problems that were going on in the state of Maryland occurred long before Donald Trump was reelected to president. So I would just like for the viewers to keep in mind that there is a Republican Party. We are fighting for stability. We are fighting to minimize the vast expenses that the state legislature continues to impose on the taxpayers here. Take a good look at the Republican Party. Support us. If you want more information and how to get involved, go to www.mcgop.com. And thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. And I just want to say a kind word for House of Delegate member Dana Stein from Baltimore, who introduced a bill yesterday that would slow down the mandatory conversion to electric vehicles. I think there's a realization that the projections and use of electric vehicles are not as popular as many think, and we should pump the brakes a bit. Kudos to Delegate Stein. I want to thank you for being here today, Stacey. I want to thank Mike for having appeared, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.